Civilization 7 is only a couple of weeks away from release. I'm sure many of you have some questions. After all, this looks to be one of the boldest and most innovative Civ games in the series for quite some time, and I can confirm that. I've played it. Well, the good news is I had an opportunity very recently to get in contact with one of the lead designers and producers for Civ 7 and ask them a few questions. And here is how that went. All right, well, thank you very much for your time. I know we got a pretty limited window, so I'll just go ahead and jump right into things, if that is all right.
Sounds great.
So I was there in Baltimore a few months ago. We met the team, and we got to take that preview look at Civ 7. And while I was there, one of the points that was emphasized to me is that Firaxis has an approach and a formula to how they develop their games. Namely, that they do 1/3 more or less leaving the games the same, 1/3 where they kind of evolve what already exists, and then 1/3 where it's completely new and evolving content. So kind of starting at a top level, I wanted to ask, what is the overarching vision for Civ 7 and how you're going to make this stand apart from the rest of the series? And then why is it important to Firaxis to continue evolving on that formula rather than playing it safe?
Yeah, I think it's tough to say the overarching view just in a short sentence. I think that you got a part of it when Ed did the presentation.
Sure.
I think that really what it is, though, is to look at what does it mean to Civ. What is Civ as a franchise? What does that mean? And then there's many different interpretations, and I'd argue most, if not all, are valid. But it's a game where you can play through a different history, another history, using real blocks. And really, with every iteration, it's let's make it better, let's make it new, let's make it interesting. And the rule of thirds, or the PIN principle for proven, improved, and new. Any way you slice it, like, that's a good guideline. We don't sit out with calculators. I mean, there was one point where the design team actually did, where they weighted and counted, and it's like, yeah, it's not exactly right, but good. We're filling some stuff in every column.
Sure.
And I think it's just a good thing to sit there and say, are we being true to the brand? Are we being true to the franchise? And then what's our vision for the next direction? And Ed's talked about a few of those things. The history comes in layers. A lot of that has so many applications. Like any good vision or any good pillar, you can kind of apply it here, and every application is a little bit different. And then when we talk about some of the other ones, it's depth, not complexity. We want to give you a lot of really interesting choices, but choices you understand. Complexity can come from combination of things, but no one system should be obtuse or oblique or hard to grok in and of itself. So I think when we talk about like what's the vision, it's really capturing all of that creative energy and that excitement in one, and we look at what are all the new things that we want to do, what the design team is interested in, what are the things that we tried that in the last version that maybe didn't work as well, what are the things that have been around for a long time and are due for some extra attention, and what is the community interested in? What does the community want to see? And sometimes that's, hey, this is the thing I love, don't change it. And other times it's, this thing is, why have you never done this? And man, there's no shortage of ideas.
Yeah, I can imagine that's true. I mean, I have to imagine that the new ages system and the mixing and matching of leaders, though, that's probably something I don't think I've seen really come from the community. That must be something pretty new that you're really trying out, and you're kind of eagerly waiting to see how players are going to respond to that. What's the initial feedback kind of been to that so far?
I think it's it's all over the place in a lot of great ways, and I think it's mirrors a lot of the conversation that we have internally too about like there's strengths, there's weaknesses on any feature, on any system. You could go this way, you could go that way. I think what's been really exciting though, not just for this feature, but a lot of it has been, there's understandable like, hey, this is the 7th iteration. It's always worked this way. Why is this different? But at the same time, that's part of the excitement, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think fans understand the logic why we went this way. Reading through all the online forums, all the Reddit posts, most of the fans seem to be supportive of the feature, right? Because they understand the logic behind it. When we take a look at the past civilizations, one of the metrics we saw is that most players don't finish the game, right? And it's not just that data, because that data applies to a lot of games. A lot of games don't get finished. But when we ask the players, the veterans player who play 1,000 hours of Civ, why don't they finish the game? They tell us two consistent reasons, right? One is that the game will snowball out of control. There's no more point in playing after the mid game, right?
Sure.
And the second is there's too much micromanagement in the late game. So we invented the age system to deal with both of those issues, right? So you have essentially a fresh start a third of the way through the game, and then you get to experience the fresh part of the 4X genre all over again 3 times. And I think fans really, really like the system.
I think that in those kind of changes, it's a great example, the way you talked about how like making a change in one place, sometimes it necessitates and other times it invites a change in other places. So by doing the aegis system comes out, it's like, well, how are civilizations the same across it, or do we change those? Are leaders the same across it, or do we change those? And those are all conversations that we have, and sort of, you know, there's trade-offs and ups and downs in each way. And I think this is a really exciting way. And I think that understandably, when we first talked about civs and leaders being separate, there was like a, you know, I remember the presentation in August. There were a lot of eyes were like, wait, what?
Oh, I was there.
Yeah. And when they did it, you're like, oh, and then we explained it, you're like, okay, that's interesting. I'm a little like, and the more time you spend hearing about it and hopefully playing it, you start to see like, oh, this is really cool. This is really exciting. It's different, but I'm intrigued. I like it. So I think that the more time, like you said, the fans have been really receptive, especially the more time they spend with it, the more they understand about it.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that. I actually just finished my first deity campaign the other day. So the more I've had kind of an opportunity to dive into the game and kind of ramp up that difficulty, the more it's growing on me. It took me a little bit, I will admit. It was a bit of it threw me for a loop. But the more I'm diving into it, the more I understand kind of what you're going for. And I see the potential for all the different directions it can go. And that extra replayability, because every one of those ages is fundamentally different. They have very different objectives. But I guess I would be kind of curious, kind of in your perspective, like you said that, you know, a lot of the players don't finish their games. And I do know full well the reasoning why. I definitely understand the snowballing. But why is that so important to Firaxis? Is it really a problem if players get to a point where they're so powerful and out of control, they're just like, okay, let's move on to the next one? Or is there some other reason you really want them to finish out a game from start to finish?
I think it's really interesting because I know I've been in a lot of conversations where that has come up, almost not quite verbatim, but pretty darn close. It's like, is that really bad? I mean, like, it's like they keep restarting, so they're clearly enjoying it, you know? So I would argue that, like, no, it's not bad, but it's also, you know, as Edward said, there's these other ages, there's this other part of the game, and they're missing out on it. And let's invite them to continue in a better way. So if you it's great if you like Antiquity and that's what you love, just play Antiquity over and over. And the game actually says, here's a good off ramp. If that's the age you love, you can win it. And then you can do that again, instead of just saying like, okay, well, I can forecast that I will win it in another 150 turns. That's a little less satisfying than, hey, I did win it and this is the point I like, and now I'm going to go reboot it. So it gives you both a complete chapter, and then also you can read that chapter again, you can do that chapter again, or you can go through the whole saga.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of fellow content designers, and part of the reason is that they design a lot of content in the late game, you know, the future ages, whatever DLCs you put in the game, and then if people just never get there, they give up middle of the game. All these content just is meaningless, right? From a designer standpoint, you want your work to be enjoyed and appreciated. So that's also part of the reason, right? We have put a lot of the work into the late game, and we want you to experience it.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding correctly, then what you're really doing is you're looking at that data and you're seeing areas for improvement, areas where a lot of the features are just underutilized, and saying, okay, if this isn't as fun enough to keep the players engaged, then here's a glowing opportunity for us to change up the formula and make things more interesting.
Exactly. The player feedback was very specific, right? They pointed out areas that can be improved. They say, oh, there are too many cities to manage. Oh, we can change that, right? They say there are too many units on the map. It's a carpet of doom. We can also solve it, right? We solved it with a commander system. So yeah, we have solutions for those particular issues, and we feel good about it.
Gotcha. I love that commander system, by the way. It's a really, really cool change in the game. All right. I want to change tactics a little bit, though, but still kind of at that high level, some design decisions. So one thing I noticed about Civ 7 is that you kind of went a little bit unconventional when it comes for the leaders or the civilizations that you're playing. There's no England, for example, but there is the Normans. You may not have, Queen Victoria, but you do have Lafayette, Harriet Tubman, Machiavelli. So it seems like there's kind of a goal to get outside of the normal cookie cutter Civ leaders that we've seen in the past. What was kind of the inspiration behind that decision?
So I think it's really interesting. If you look back, if you look at Civ 6 now, it's bursting to the seams with leaders and Civs from across the world. It's really hard at the start of any Civ game to pick what combinations you have, what leaders, what Civs you bring in. And I would say that, I don't know if doubly so, but more so when you separate the two, it gets harder in one way and it gets easier in another, because now we're not just selecting Civs, we're selecting Civs for different periods of history. And how do they chain together? So there's a layer of complexity that's new, but we also freed ourselves from having to get traditional heads of state the way we did previously. Now, not that everyone was, but for the vast majority of our leaders, they were, at least from a certain point of view, a very clear leader of a political or geographical civilization. We don't have to do that now. We can just pick amazing, impactful, awesome people that we've Harriet Tubman was not a leader of a government, but she was a leader in the of very important movements and a very influential person. So being able to bring her in without having to worry about a Civ tied to it was a huge freeing thing. What gets to be really interesting is when you start debating, okay, cool, now we understand what our goals are, where our parameters are, who fills this slot? And there's some really awesome conversations where the designers are like, well, obviously we're going to have blah, blah, blah. And someone's like, well, we're obviously going to have this. And by the time we get all the obviouslies, the list is 174 people long. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's not actually all obvious if it's going to be that long. And they're all great ideas. And then there's ones that's like, wow, this is one we added later before, we should bring it in earlier this time. And, we've reflected this civilization in one way previously, we're going to reflect it a slightly different way this time. So I would say it's a really tough push and pull. I actually, my mind goes back to some of the movies I watched growing up, where they're like, some football managers like, well, if we put this person over here, how do we move this person over there? And how do we match? We need someone who's a leader that's got really good diplomacy bonuses. Oh, well, this person would be perfect. Well, if we put them in, they're a leader of this from the same geographical region, so we need to bump that person out. And it is a.
I think it's also important to note that that list of like 170 leaders, they're not going anywhere. They're not going into the toilet as soon as the game launches. They're somewhere, right? We're still working on them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. I mean,
Sure.
we want to, in some ways, we want those lists to satisfy cravings. In some ways, we want it to, feel comfortable and cozy. In some ways, we want it to be, people say finally. In other ways, we want it to be people to say like, whoa, that's exciting, I didn't know. I think some of the most passionate conversations are when one of our historians or designers who walks in is like, here's this person y'all have never heard of. Look how awesome they are. And we're all like, whoa, I didn't know about that. Like, that's incredible. Let's figure out can they fit in here, or maybe in a post-launch thing, we'll put them in. And we've had leaders come in that have pushed other ones off and brought other ones back on. So it's really exciting. And I think it's, there's no doubt that we would have liked to include even more, but
I'm sure
the potential is endless, right? I don't know how many leaders Civ 6 launched as. I think around 16, and then you end up with 50-ish. So Andrew promised me we're gonna update even more frequently, right? Update even harder. So be on the lookout for more for sure.
Absolutely. I'm kind of curious, does it start mostly, though, with picking out like kind of what civilizations you want to represent and then finding a good leader from each of those and finding a way to work them into the game, or more the other way around? Or maybe this is more of a chicken and the egg kind of a question.
Well, it's interesting because in Civ previously, previous iterations, we had to kind of tie them together, but that's not the case anymore.
True.
Like we're looking at them. There is I guess a Venn diagram of import because of the history of the franchise, that choosing a Civ or a leader is a way to represent people from a culture, from an area, from a but we don't have to pick a pair. Now, some of them, there are some really clear pairs. Like, oh, you're picking Hatshepsut in Egypt, like, yep, I get it. Augustus in Rome, yep, we get it. Harriet Tubman, well, yeah, there's America, but there's Ben Franklin in America. And, is one, they're not mapped to each other. There's an overlap, and there's other ones where there isn't an overlap. And that's a lot of the discussion of like, well, we don't want to pick that. We love that leader, but we've already got that Civ reflected. So should we use that slot for different representation? And it's a really tough one. And I would say that, I'm sure people will point out areas we could have done better, but I think that it's a lot of honest effort to do a really, really good, I jokingly call it like a peanut buttering of the globe. Like, can we spread it as evenly as possible? Or it'll never be perfect. You got those nooks and crannies and spots where you get stuck, and I don't know.
Okay, very cool. Well, speaking of kind of the historical due diligence, I'm going to shift gears just a smidge, but along those lines. So, previously in other Civ games like Civilization 6, that game was divided up into, I think, eventually 9 eras or ages after all the DLCs were included. So I imagine it was a little bit difficult to come to the decision to ultimately split Civ 7 into only 3 ages, because obviously they have to cover a very wide swath of human history. So what ultimately drove you to only have 3 ages instead of 4, 5, or more?
Well, I can supply the gameplay reason. Maybe Andrew can, supplement with historical reason later.
Sure.
But on the gameplay side, we found out that people don't really like switching too often. Like, say if we have like 9 ages in the game, and then you switch 9 times, that's a lot, right? Like, you're not going to
Sure.
recognize who you're playing against at the end of the day. So we want to keep something the ages contained to a limited numbers. And another reason is that we want each age to have a deep focus on some area, right? Antiquity age is going to be the beginning of your civilization. It's a time where you go out and explore your land, right? Exploration, we shift the focus to ocean, right? To distant land, right? This is the time you sail across the ocean and discover a new continent. And in modern age, it's going to be 3 ideologies competing against each other, accommodating in a world war, right? Each age has its own very specific mission, very specific topic, and we want you to focus on that. And I think those are very strong 3 points. If we go with 9 eras, it's very hard to find 9 important points in history that can satisfy the gameplay needs.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that if you to springboard off of that, as you have those 3, it becomes more about telling a story of the age than just a thing that happened. If you break it up too much, I think it worked in Civ 6 to have those breaks, because those breaks didn't have that gameplay reset. It was more like
Right.
it was a bookmark. It was a flag. Yes, you got to have a golden age effect or a dark age effect where you picked up the bonuses that you got, but it was really it was more like a lap on a single race, rather than turning the page into a new chapter. And when you have that, you're telling a story. So our design team, and especially with our historians, Ed Beach and Andrew Johnson, worked extensively on looking at global history. What was happening across the world? It's not like it was simultaneous here and there, but more common threads emerged. This is around the time that most of the world was doing, like Edward said, that sea voyage, or either conducting it, impacted by it, or maybe experts, they were the more seasoned veterans there. So there were certainly people doing long sea voyages earlier than what our calendar for Age of Exploration starts, or even some who didn't really get around to it until later because of where their culture was. But from a general global perspective, that kind of fits, and that's a story that you can live in. Like you said, you can tell. And this game, it may be a different story, but it is a story centered around that ocean exploration, those distant lands. How do you hold tight to your home? Do you voyage out? What do you do with that, with the world going through that shift? If you broke it into 9, it's going to be much more micro. And it's like, this thing happened, react to it, or this is the one thing you're doing, and it doesn't give you the same play space.
Okay, and that makes perfect sense. Actually, one thing you said that kind of struck me there, I actually was going to ask what the reasoning was that Civ 7 actually seems to end at an earlier year than most other Civ games, right? Some like Civ 6 can go into a very futuristic kind of an age, whereas this one seems to end around, like, say, the first manned spaceflight. But actually, what you said earlier about ideological wars, I guess that kind of answers my question a little bit, more toward the end of the Cold War era, right, when ideological dominance sort of started to emerge. That's kind of the reasoning, I guess, when that story ends in Civ 7, isn't it?
Exactly. It's like a three-act structure you see in
Mhm.
Hollywood movies, right? You need a beginning, you need a conflict in the middle, and then you need a resolution, the climax at the end, right? And our resolution, the climax to your player, the player journey is going to be the World War, right? World War II in this example. So we want the game to end there with a bang, right? Literally, with a nuke.
It doesn't
So
have to end with a bang. No, there's other victories.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's going to end with
I
a
like
nuke.
I
Come
like to
on.
end it with a nuke, many nukes actually. But yeah, we think that makes more sense than ending it a little bit later, where it's probably a little bit more mellowed out compared to World War II.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's been interesting to see I think we were well aware of the fan concern that like when you see what it ends here, is there less game? It's like, not at all. There's way more game than there
Mhm.
there was. As you said, it's dense, it's rich, it's all there. It's funny. I'll tell a sort of embarrass myself story. I was playing for a long time before I even realized that we were ending early. Like it just felt like the natural end to me. Like I personally never paid attention to the year counter
Mhm.
in a Civ game. It just wasn't a part that was important to me. I always giggled when I would see, oh, someone so launched a rocket in 1750, and I'm like, that was funny. But in my own games, I didn't think about it. So when I was playing Civ 7, and I was like, yeah, this is just when it ends. It's like, yeah, I knew we didn't have, giant death robots yet, but it's like, I know, like, oh yeah, no, it feels good. I don't have a problem with it. Like once I got my hands on it, and I was good. So I felt a little foolish, but also reaffirmed. And I think the way Edward said it is exactly right. It's a three-act structure, and it's funny because the number of times we would talk about, some of the great trilogies that exist in storytelling, and like, yeah, you need to have a conclusion, but also a reason to continue, and that's where the legacy system that ties into completing your legacy pass at the end of each age is like it's an end, but it's an end that opens up a new beginning, which is super exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, wonderful. Well, I want to be mindful of our time, but I do have a couple of smaller technical questions to ask if I can. Um, so one question that I've received a lot from my audience is what kind of modding tools are going to exist for Civilization 7, especially since, as you noted, there's such a wide open field for the creation of additional civs or additional leaders, etc. Do you have any announced plans for what those tools are going to look like?
So we don't have anything announced for what the tools will
Yeah.
look like. They're not going to be there right at launch. It's been important that we design the game to allow modding, but we focused on making the best game experience first, and then we're going to make some announcements, and we'll get the modding tools out.
Sure.
We'll try not to make everyone wait too long.
Okay. Well, and
I
you
will
also
let
have
you
so
in
many
on a little
platforms
little
releasing on
secret.
too.
Oh, sorry. I will let you in on a little secret though, that we have families and friends play this game in a testing group, and they're already making mods sometimes.
Oh,
They're already
really?
making their own leaders,
Okay.
and they look pretty
Yeah.
nice.
So it is absolutely moddable. It's just
Exactly.
we don't have that full tool set that'll roll out on launch day.
Copy. Okay, very good. Then my last question then for you be about the multiplayer community. So obviously from Civ 5, Civ 6, the multiplayer community has kind of self-organized itself a lot with either their balance patches or just their kind of a fan ladder system, right, in order to create better matchmaking experiences. I'm curious, is that something you kind of intend to allow to continue, like leaning on that decentralized approach, or with Civ 7 is Firaxis and 2K looking to change up their multiplayer system and kind of create their more of a matchmaking system themselves?
Well, as a system designer that cares a lot about competitive balance, I will tell
Yeah.
you that the next few months I'm going to be working a lot on the multiplayer features, something like teams, increasing the multiplayer count, things like that. And I think the age system really affords us to be able to have a lower entry barrier to all
Mm.
players. Right, used to be that a game lasts, I don't know, 20, 12 hours, but now you can just finish age in a single afternoon, and we
Yeah.
imagine they will attract a lot of players. And when we have enough multiplayer count, a lot of players coming in to play the multiplayer mode, then maybe we will consider esports,
He, he
rank system.
he's using these opportunities to pump me to do
Yeah,
stuff.
right.
I think it's great though because I think that as you said, there's a lot of work going on. I think one of the really exciting things is it's the biggest Civ team we've had. So as much as there's things left to do, it's like we've got a lot of people working on it, and there's going to be we've already talked about some of our post-launch plans very generally. There's going to be more on that coming. We've got our first collections at least conceptually announced. So people will be able to get into that, and we'll have some more updates, like you said, with feature improvements and growth. So talk about it, communicate, share, and play, and then we're going to go where the players need us to.
Okay, well, that's what I like to hear. Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Well, I know we are out of time, but I want to thank you guys very much for this sit down. I really appreciate you answering my questions. I'm looking forward to seeing how the release goes.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And there you have it, folks. I hope you found this informative and interesting in some way. I always think it is great to talk directly with the developers in order to get their vision for a game, especially one as high profile as Civilization 7. And if you guys are eager to learn more about Civ 7, I highly recommend you stick around with this channel for at least the next few days, because I will be releasing some exclusive early access gameplay showing off all of the different ages and mechanics that you can look forward to. I hope to see you there. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.